Welcome everyone. Thanks for attending our show and tell today. Let's get started with a little acknowledgement of country, acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. For me, that is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Before we get started, just a reminder, we're operating in a pre-competitive environment, so not a commercial forum. If there are any conflicts of interest, which I doubt in this case, absolutely, but I'll point it out, please let us know and we'll add you to our register. We're recording today's event and we will be sharing it on our website afterwards. If you wanted to present something that you think is of interest to the larger working group or the larger MECLA network, please let us know. Same if you think of someone who might be interested in presenting here, such as Tim did with today's presentation that Rebecca will be giving us, please let us know and we'll get that set up for you. And before we get started, I'll also let you know we are monthly. The next one is going to be on the 2nd of July, and we will have a presentation from the GBCR Green Star Fit Out team. They'll be presenting what they delivered there. But today we will be having a presentation from Rebecca Donoghue. I didn't ask you how to pronounce that. I hope that's correct.
Perfect. Well done.
She's a senior associate at SJB in Sydney, and she'll be talking about a project, the Surry Hills Village, a mass timber building, mixed-use precinct, for which she was the project architect. As always, I'll hand over to Rebecca now. Put any questions in the chat. She'll be talking to us, and then we can ask questions in the team afterwards. Off you go. Handing over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen and let me know you can all see that. Yep, good. Thumbs up. Thank you for having me here today. I had the very unique opportunity of delivering SJB's currently one and only mass timber constructed building at our Surry Hills Village project. And today I'll be taking you through sort of the design and procurement process and focusing also on just the lessons we learned during that time. There was also already an acknowledgement of country, but I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land, the Gadi people of the Eora Nation. All right, Surry Hills Village. So Surry Hills, if you're not familiar, is located about 3 kilometres south of the Sydney CBD. It was a 12,000 square metre site and comprised of 4 residential towers, which you can see in the white, a hotel that's in the blonde brick just tucked in there, and then full street sort of low and lower ground retail, and then there's a 6-storey commercial building you can see just peeking out the top there, which will be the focus of our talk. This was the mass timber constructed component of this precinct. This is the previous site. Cleveland Street is to the north here and Baptist Street is on the east. And these are 2 pretty major roads through the area. And the southern half of the site was an on-grade open asphalt car park with the shopping centre to the north. The project was developed and built by our client Toga. It replaced a very rundown single-storey shopping centre on the site that was very affectionately known as Murder Mall. But whilst I don't think anyone was actually murdered there, from these images you can see it was a pretty grim space to be in. The portion of the original 1913 bank building facade is just located here. That was partially taken out by the entrance to the supermarket, but this was later reinstated by our fellow architects and collaborators on this precinct, Studio Prineus, who were the architects for the heritage component of this project. Our commercial building occupies the space immediately adjacent in this open area to the right. Prior to the site being developed into a shopping centre, it used to be Wunderlich Limited factory, and they were responsible for producing all the detailed metalwork shop fronts and pressed metal ceilings and roofs that made up a lot of Sydney's older buildings, such as like Town Hall and some of the really big major banks in around Martin Place. The image on the left is actually the showroom that used to be on the site that sort of showcased all the elements that Wunderlich produced. And there were elements of this that we picked up. You can see the windows at the top here. We did pick up moments of that in the new design. This is the entrance to the hotel. You can see that kind of sunburst design was incorporated based off a reinterpretation of those windows. And those are sort of scattered throughout the site to pay respect to that original use. The lane is also known as Wunderlich Lane. If you've been to site and have seen Wunderlich written somewhere, that's why it's called that. A lot of people don't realise that where that has come from. But yeah, the precinct is called Surry Hills Village, but the retail and laneway is known as Wunderlich Lane. So the commercial building sits at the northern end of the site along Cleveland Street. So that's Cleveland Street just here. And it's Cleveland Street is the main arterial road that divides Surry Hills to Redfern. So this, despite being called Surry Hills Village, is actually in Redfern. The commercial building was deliberately sited on the northern edge of the precinct to provide an acoustic buffer essentially to the retail laneway, which you can sort of see coming through here, and the residence and hotel beyond. Given that Cleveland Street is quite a hostile environment, it's loud and dirty, and it's just not that nice to have sort of tables and chairs and restaurants on that side. So that's why it was sited that way. And original concepts of this building actually did have it as a curtain wall, glass curtain wall building, which is something you kind of typically see out of mass timber constructed buildings. I think people like to showcase the glazing, the timber through glazing. That's not the direction we pursued here, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. The building is a hybrid construction. So there's concrete from the ground floor up to level 1 slab. And then the timber construction starts at level 1 for the rest of the building. There is also a component of steel structure on level 1 to deal with some column transfers over the event space that is located at level 1 here. The rest of the floor plates are full commercial floor plates from 2 to 6. As I mentioned before, this is SJB's first mass timber constructed building. The same can actually be said for our client Toga, and who were the builders for the project. And in fact, only the structural and fire engineers had ever worked on mass timber buildings previously. So services engineers and yeah, a lot of the trades had never worked on mass timber construction. So to say the learning curve was steep is a massive understatement. It was yeah, there was no experts in the room, really. The reason for this being constructed as a timber building is really driven by the client's desire to add this building type to their portfolio of projects, and was very much a litmus test for future developments for them moving into a more sustainable direction. But you also might be looking at all these images and going, where the hell is the timber? This is, as mentioned before, it was originally designed as a glass curtain wall. But if you do know the area, it is very much a masonry precinct and suburb, and it just really did not fit within the context of Redfern and Surry Hills. So the design is very much in reference to the surrounding context, but also the kind of old warehouse typology of the timber structure with the brick outside, and that the Wunderlich factory was also constructed that way. So in certain lights you can see the timber through the glazing, but a lot of these photos you actually can't see it. But I promise it is timber. In order to discuss this building properly, I also need to touch on the context and climate in which we were working at the same time. So SJB won this project via a design excellence competition in 2018, with the DA approval coming in late 2019. And as we all know, 2020 was a pretty significant year for everyone, not just for New South Wales with the introduction of the Design and Building Practitioners Act, which this entire project fell under, including the commercial building, but also the global pandemic. So not only were we facing a very steep learning curve with our first timber construction and new legislative parameters, we were having to do it in complete isolation of one another, so all on teams. also with the pandemic came the global timber shortage, and timber prices skyrocketed. So it is a true testament to our client for their commitment to continuing with timber construction. Just based off high-level conversations I had with them at the time, this building cost around 25% more than if it was built from concrete. So it does give you an idea of, they could have saved money, but they really pushed forward with it. So, props to them. Also, when the first timber pieces were craned into site, we were subjected to the heaviest rainfall on record ever in New South Wales. So it was about 3 months of rain in which they were trying to get the timber into site. So you can imagine what that did. The image I've just chucked a few site images in. The image on the left is, a beautiful, bright, sunny day, which we might have had one single moment of, I think, in 3 months. What it also shows is the steel structure on this level. So that's one of the really enormous structural beams, steel structural beams that is on level 1 above the commercial, the event space on level 1. I was trying to find some of my site photos of sort of all the kind of stained and wet timber. I couldn't really find, I've got thousands of photos, couldn't find them, but I found this one. This is actually looking up through the lift shaft, and you can see just the staining and the discoloration that occurred on the timber. It was just very hard to keep anything dry. Fortunately, it was just surface level. There was no structural faults or delamination or anything like that. So it really was just a case of, just sanding and retreating the timber to improve it again. And this also highlights another thing that was a bit of one of the lessons for us, and it's something that was very unexpected. So we're not just subject to weather, but how to protect the timber during construction from just general wear and tear. If you've ever been on a site, you know that all the trades are not the tidiest people, and there was sort of very little care given to the fact that this was a finished product. These columns and walls were actually going to be the final finished product. So we were having to deal with people still drawing genitalia and curse words all over the timber, and someone having to not just clean it off but sand it off. So it's actually kind of, I didn't include any of those photos. I didn't think it was very professional of me to do that. But, it's just kind of one of those things you don't appreciate until you're in it. And so we really had to kind of encourage the builder to really, enforce to their trades that you need to protect it. You need to not damage it, not put your bucket of water sitting on it for 2 weeks. So yeah, interesting lesson to learn there. This is a typical floor plate. The core is located on the northern facade. Because that is Cleveland, that was the very noisy Cleveland Street. Yes, there's an acknowledgement that that's where all the solar gain comes from. But because this is a commercial office, we also need to consider acoustics and distractions. And so that's why the core was located on that northern side. It's a very conventional 7x8 structural grid, which came about due to a balance of beam and column sizes. We could have done larger spans with less columns, but the individual beam members would have required upsizing, and we were already pressed for head height in these areas as it was. So we did keep the grid to a smaller, more conventional spacing. As I mentioned earlier, it is a hybrid building. This is the element of steel on level 1, which was integrated with the timber. The client wanted a column-free event space, which was a late design change. So ideally, we would have had the time to amend the timber structure to deal with this rather than introduce steel. As it was, the cost of the steel was astronomical for whatever reason, and it took the building team about 2 months just to get off this floor. By comparison, it took about a week and a half for the subsequent pure timber floors to go up. And this is because of, timber on timber connections are so highly resolved and detailed, and that there's minimal tolerance concerns. But as soon as you throw in, imperfect concrete and steel, the timing just got blown out due to reworking of the steel and concrete items. The image on the screen does show the 2 enormous steel beams we had to introduce. And the second image is actually the exact same space of this is the event space, and this was fit out by Bates Smart. But you can see the columns and things in the background there, but the steel was concealed with a sealing treatment. So the facade is a combination of brick slip and metal cladding with large punched openings shrouded with deep metal hoods. The brick slips were used to reduce the weight on the CLT floors. The facade was also originally designed to be a prefabricated panel system, which worked well with the formal ordered design. We actually didn't end up going with prefab, which I'll go into a little bit later, but you can sort of see even in the images that it was still retained. You can still see control joints and things. So it essentially could still lend itself to be a prefabricated facade very, very easily. Given that we had no experience in mass timber construction and very little in the way of prefabricated facades, we did do a number of field trips to some completed projects by other architects. This is a project we visited in Canberra by BVN at the at ANU campus, which shows these big facade panels being craned in. And you can see that, the bricks, the windows, and the framing are all in place. They get craned in and stored like normal curtain wall panels with steel brackets hanging off the edge of the slab that the panels get attached to. And the great benefit of a system like this is that there's no need for scaffolding or multiple trades on site coming in one after the other to finish it off. And while we did go quite far down this road, we ended up with an in situ build due to cost overruns across the whole project, not just with the building, but yeah, the 8 other buildings on site. That being said, the general build-up and connection details back to the timber structure remained relatively unchanged from the prefabricated system. We retained the large steel brackets that hung off the edge of the CLT slab, which then support a deep 150 mil structural framing system that actually was prefabricated, and that was attached to the brackets. That it did sort of speed up the process quite a bit, given that you could still prefabricate the steel structure, and it was really just the brick trade afterwards that had to come in and do that post finishing, and then the windows themselves. Yeah, everything else was just built in sequence, but you can see the sort of that's the 150 framing, and then there's just supports for the brick slip system on the facade there. There were 2 ways we arranged the CLT slabs and glulam beams across this floor plate. Arrangement 1 here was utilised in the mid-floor locations to maximise the head height where possible, so bringing up the beam structure up to match the floor finish, also the CLT slab floor level. We then used arrangement 2 on our perimeter beams in order to allow the CLT slab to extend over the beam, so those facade brackets could be installed on top of the slab edge. However, this did result in deeper beams around the perimeter. And the deeper perimeter beams were also driven by mechanical servicing requirements, which I will talk about in a minute. And you can see in this elevation too that the A-style brace bay that we went with. We have one of these brace bays per elevation per floor, and we did do quite a bit of testing to see what style we wanted, and ultimately chose the A-style frame. We had to consider this quite carefully from not just an exterior facade perspective, but more so internally. I mean, as you can see from the outside photos, you actually don't see through to the timber structure a lot from the outside, like you would with a glass curtain wall system. So it really was more about the internal experience and how these things framed the views, didn't impede the floor plate. That's sort of all those things we tested. And we really love these moments in the project because the structure becomes a tangible front of house element for the occupants of the building. A lot of the fit outs, their reception sits, this is directly across from the lift opening, so it's where the reception is. So immediately when you come onto one of these floor plates, you are just blessed with this kind of immediate, structure in your face, which is really, really lovely. One of the biggest learning curves we experienced on this project was the level of documentation and coordination that's required so much earlier in the construction program that we would not normally experience with concrete building. And most of you are likely familiar with, we had to have 100% coordinated documentation and 3D modelling in order for another team of specialists to come on and create a more detailed model, which is the one on the right there, that's fed to the manufacturing company. And as you can see, they take our, very simple Revit model, and they build in all the tolerances, the slots for the steel plates, and like every single screw and bolt hole. Tim would be very familiar with one of those models. During this stage, our coordination meetings were happening at least twice a week and involved us, the builder, the developer, the services and structural engineers, and also subcontractors and timber specialists. And that is a significant increase on a concrete build where you're more likely to meet, once a fortnight and rarely be involved directly with subcontractors at that stage. For this reason, we had to have every single penetration, no matter how small, coordinated, modelled and documented in our pack, both vertically through the CLT floor slabs and horizontally through the glulam beams and CLT walls. We colour-coded penetrations and schedules based on the services types and material of the duct or pipe or conduit. It was a lot of coordination. Normally we would not document anything smaller than about 100 mil diameter, but this was, every single hole through had to be documented. And because penetrations equal cost, we worked very closely with our builder and all those people I mentioned earlier in order to ensure that we were not only capturing all the required elements, but also being as efficient and economical as possible with the penetrations. As you may know, ideally, you're not core drilling through timber on site if you've missed something, like you could potentially do with concrete. I think I aged about 10 years during the shop drawing process. It was a lot. I also got to learn a little bit of German because WHAG was the supplier, so it was coming from Austria. It was a bit of an unexpected twist for me, getting up Google Translate to work out what the words were saying. But, got through it. And to be honest, the only thing that had to be fixed on site was a little bit of chainsawing to one panel. And that's I'm pretty proud of myself for that one. 6 levels of timber and only one panel had to be fixed. And that was because of concrete, not because of my mistake. So, 100% success rate, I think. This is the RCP, and this also highlights another challenge that was the education and kind of encouragement to our services engineers to achieve ordered service runs. Because we had exposed ceiling services, we wanted to minimize penetrations through the beams. We had to work really hard alongside those engineers to get the nicest, cleanest linear runs of services we possibly could. And we did, they eventually came to the table and did appreciate what we were trying to achieve. And then it was a really great collaborative approach to the project. You can see here too, I think I mentioned earlier that the perimeter beams were deeper, and you can see these elements coming out in pink here. Those are the air intake ducts for or exhaust for the mechanical systems for the air conditioning units. Because those penetrations were the biggest, those beams had to become a bit deeper to deal with the structural requirements and charring and all that. I put this timeline together as a summary for more like talking to my colleagues and other clients, if they're sort of unfamiliar with the process, how the timber construction timeline differs from a conventional concrete build, or at least how it works concurrently with a concrete construction. Because of course, on Surry Hills Village, this is one of 8 buildings and the rest of the precinct was a concrete construction. This was the only one that was timber, but they all still had to align. The top line represents that concrete construction program, and below is what we experienced, at least, with the timber construction. The main points being earlier subcontractor involvement and specialist involvement, much more intensive construction documentation and modelling. And for us, we had to factor in the longer lead times for manufacture and delivery, given our timber was coming from Austria. At the time, I should say too, there were no active Australian or New Zealand companies, or at least I think there might have been one in New Zealand, but the cost comparison was vast. So that's why they went to WHAG, the Austrian supplier. Since then, there's been a lot of new timber suppliers come onto the market, especially in Australia, which is really great to see. A few years or a year or so before this project, I think, I can't remember the name of the people who were in Sydney or in Australia, sorry, had gone under. So yeah, there was unfortunately no one available in Sydney or Australia to do it. I'm also just going to quickly acknowledge the amazing team we did work with. So yeah, we had the Robert Bird group. They were one of the only people who actually had experience with the timber in their entire team, and the services engineers with Stantec. But then the specialist timber consultants, you might have come across some of these in your work. But LogX, that was actually an Australian company that made our 3D, that really detailed 3D model. And Stora Enso, I've said that was sort of the middleman between us, the design team, the client team, and the manufacturer. And they also did all the shop drawings for the CLT. Whereas VHUG, which you're probably all familiar with, they're based in Austria, they did all the glulam. And then, yeah, early subcontractor involvement. And then Hilti also came in. They were providing fire protection advice for all the penetrations through the timber. I think just the penetrations alone probably took up 80% of the coordination on this project. It was wild. So here's a little bit about the waterproofing. As I mentioned earlier, the introduction of the Design and Building Practitioners Act came on during this time. So not only were we doing the timber, we were also trying to learn a complete new legislative parameter. And due to that, the scrutiny of water and weatherproofing was onerous because it is one of the elements of the Building Practitioners Act. We did fully membrane any exposed timber. We didn't have exposed timber on this project. The client was just so averse to even exploring it, given we were all a bit terrified by what the Act really meant. So the roof is fully membraned using a PVC sheet membrane system over rigid insulation. And this particular system was from Fatra. They seem to be one of the leading people who had all the systems in place for doing tested systems in place for doing timber construction. So yeah, we went with them. But we know that it's not to say you can't expose timber to the elements. And we did do quite a bit of work trying to convince the client to expose some of the timber. The left image is the Zahns building in Barangaroo, where they do expose their mass timber sophites. The middle image is one of my favourite projects, the Freeman swimming pool in London. They do have exposed glulam structure in a very moist internal environment, also a chlorinated environment. It looks like they might have treated the timber in something, so don't quote me on that, I'm not too sure. And the image on the right is by Crofi, where they exposed timber on the exterior veranda element of their pavilion performing arts centre. So that's all to say we don't approach timber construction as though it's full of limitations. These projects and many, many more prove that it can achieve a beautiful outcome, so almost more so than you can with concrete and steel, in my opinion. And this is something that SJB are certainly really keen to keep pushing and exploring in the future. I like to talk to this slide as a moment of appreciation for essentially how primitive the nature, like timber is. It's such a simple but contradictory notion that you let this material burn in order for it to protect itself without any intervention or applied protective finishes, which I find a really beautiful concept. That being said, we did have to get very creative with a couple of interfaces at Surry Hills, particularly due to the lack of testing and certification of common building products and their installation in mass timber construction. So one example is an example of a common building element that didn't have associated accreditation or testing in Australia for timber construction at that time. I believe Lendlease had built Barangaroo, Darramoo House, but they held all the IP for all the testing, and Toga unfortunately just doesn't have the grunt to be able to carry out private testing. So we had a combination of precast concrete lintels and intermediate steel framing. This is a plan detail of the lift jam here. You can see that the timber stops, and then we've got studs double lined in fire rated plasterboard, and then the steel and structure of the lift itself. So there is a separation between the lift equipment and the timber, because you could install the lift to stud, but you could not install the lift to timber. Fire rated plasterboard also entirely encased the lift shaft, meaning we couldn't actually see the timber of the lift shaft when you're on the in the fit out, and therefore we actually had to overclad the plasterboard with a second timber panel. So you can see that there, and then in the image there, that's Tilly board. So it's still from Austria. It's the exact same species of panel, but it is just a sort of cladding element. So it's a little bit of a lie. There was a desire from the client to limit the trades and keep the building as pure as possible, so to speak. And in hindsight, given the context of timber construction, of the timber construction industry at the time, we probably would have done these lifts out of concrete, not just to speed up the process, but I think to just take the complexity out of the construction, given that you couldn't see it. Another one we did was where we have Hebel and speed panel riser walls. We had to get creative as well, because these, again, two common building products did also not have certification for installation against CLT slabs. So we essentially had to oversize all of our risers so that 2 layers of fire-rated plasterboard could be installed within the shaft to protect the interface of the Hebel panel with the slab edge. So that's the Hebel panel just there. Ultimately, these tricks and cover-ups did not take away from the end results, and we were able to achieve some other outcomes without faking it, which is good. Unfortunately, this is another one. This is the event space. Because of the classification under the NCC, we did actually have to overclad all most of the timber ceiling and timber structure. We could keep the columns and things exposed, but we did have to overclad all of that. But it's not all bad news. This is the fire stair where CLT and glulam is completely exposed, and the irony was not lost on us. The fact that the fire isolated stair could have full exposed timber in it was, interesting. But we've, other than some performance solutions such as window drenches, there are no smoke and mirrors here. This is what it looks like, and it's where occupants of the building can kind of fully immerse themselves in the timber construction. In fact, one of the tenants who's actually taken up the top 2 floors just keeps the doors open to this stair, and they use it as a communication stair between the 2 floors of their office. And as this faces north, it gets beautiful sunlight in there. It feels very Scandi sauna. It's lovely. It was a really unexpected and lovely outcome of the project. Unfortunately, it was the main thoroughfare for all the trades, and this is a photo during construction. You can see that the timber is just getting destroyed because, again, they didn't really appreciate that this was the finished product. So yeah, in hindsight, I think with a client who might not be experienced in timber construction, this is something we will enforce quite a lot if we were to do timber again. Try and protect the stairs a little bit more. So our Surry Hills commercial building is certainly not, pushing the boundaries in terms of what you can achieve with timber construction, but we were incredibly proud of what we were able to achieve with the project team, considering our 0 level of experience heading into it. And we are really excited about the future of timber construction in this country, given how much the local industry has grown in the few short years since our own journey. I think, Tim's doing a lot of exciting stuff with his project. So that's where we want to head moving forward. We've unfortunately not had the chance to do another timber building. We've tried to get it in on a lot of competitions and things, but we would love to keep doing this. Knowing what we know now, it's a little less daunting, I think, for us. So I think that's it for me. That's it. So thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's amazing. And I've actually driven past this.
Yeah.
Now I see the picture. I'm like, yes, I know this. I saw this go up. That's fantastic. It's lovely. Do you want to raise hands, people, if you have anything to say, or just jump into the conversation? Otherwise, I'll go through the chat questions. Any questions directly? No? All right. Tim.
Yeah, I'll ask questions. I love the project. It's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You mentioned you've been adding it into design competitions. How else has this project changed your approach at SJB? Like, have you captured the learnings and disseminated it amongst the office? And what things have you really picked up on from this project, which you're starting to use in other projects?
Yeah, I've done a couple of talks to the office just to describe essentially what I described to you. But also went through a little bit more of just the basics of timber construction. I did pull that out of the presentation. I figure you guys probably know a bit more about that than I do. So I think it should not be a scary thing. I think people see the dollar signs of it, particularly during the time that we did it. It was very expensive to do it. I think we only see the benefit of it, and that's not just from construction. Yes, there's difficulties, but the speed which you can construct is pretty amazing. But also just being in those spaces that are timber constructed, I guess it touches on that kind of biophilic design. It's so different to be in a timber building than it is to be in a concrete building. You can smell it. It's even that small thing is just such a lovely thing to be in. So I think that's why we really like to push it. And I think it's a lot easier to get it on a commercial building. We actually don't do a lot of commercial work. We had previously done a design for a commercial project prior to this one that was meant to be all glulam. Was it Strong Build? Was that the old Australian company that was timber? Yes, you're nodding. Yes. Good. Yeah, so Strong Build existed at that time. That's when they went under, and that building actually then ended up changing to concrete. So we're also encouraging it in our residential, because we do a lot of residential work, and you kind of test it with certain clients. You're like, maybe they'll go for it. So I think it's just getting what I would like is our office to be more educated, so we can talk with more agency to it, and be more confident in that, because that's how I think you would convince a client. Yes, you might need bigger floor to floors and there might be a cost associated with it, but what are the benefits? And I think that really does come down to speed of construction, the biophilic design. Yeah.
And I'll just ask one more question, follow up.
Yeah.
You mentioned a 25% premium. Is that sort of a figure that you're quoting based on that post-COVID pandemic shipping pricing spike that happened?
Yes, I think, yeah. So they didn't give me exact numbers. Obviously, they'll keep those quite tight to their chest, but they were like, it's about 20 to 25% over the fees of a concrete building. But yes, it is very much impacted by the climate at the time. Just so I don't know if it's dropped or the new climate of the world is making it go up again. So yes, I'm not so familiar with those ebbs and flows.
We were trying to supply the Sydney fish market roof around the same time, and we saw a huge 15-25% spike, mainly driven by shipping, but that's all gone back to normal now, which is good. Sorry, just one last question. I didn't get in my head, so there's a concrete to level 1, and then there's the event space on level 1 to 2, and then 3, 4, 5, and 6, including the roof is CLT.
Yes,
so you've done basically 4 full floors, and you said that went up in a week and a half.
Each floor, each of the top 4 pure timber floors went up. The structure went up week and a half each floor.
A week and a half per floor. Amazing.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. It was level 1, the event space, that took about 2.5 months, but that was that really rainy period and the complexities with the steel structure and things. Most of the problems they had on site were not to do with the timber. It was to do with the concrete or the steel. It was nothing to do with the timber, and which is why
interface issues.
Exactly. Yes. So the chainsaw came out when someone had poured the concrete slab wrong, and it was easier to chop the timber than it was to grind back the concrete. So, and those builders were also learning. They weren't really across how to protect timber properly and things like that. So I think that's, you get a bit of, had a lot of staining and all the CLT, I should say, was all the industrial grade, so it had the ripple in it, but it was probably a little bit sort of, some issues were made a bit worse with all the wet weather, but they went back and obviously fixed it up. But if they knew how to protect it better in the construction period, maybe then they would have saved money later down the track with labor to then refinish it. So they have lessons to learn as well. Yeah.
I'll hand over to others. Thank you again for coming in.
Jason, I have a feeling you have a question following up right on that. The handling.
Oh, you're on mute. Sorry if you're talking. Conceal.
How could you guess, Kathy? Look, I think someone actually wrote in there, hybrid versions are good. I would question some of the commentary around speed,
Mhm.
and I put it in the question there. If this is a 6-story build and it took 3 years, I kind of have trouble seeing how that makes it faster. And I also just want to make a point, because it was inferred that there were problems because of the concrete. I'm hearing problems because of the timber, because we had issues where the design changed, and so couldn't fix it in timber, had to get steel and concrete in. And it just seems that there's a little bit of, if it takes a week and a half to put up a 1-story, how come it took 3 years to build?
So the entire precinct took 3 years. So this
Okay.
is one of 8 buildings. So it's a 12,000 square meter site, where the commercial building only took up a small portion of that. So
Okay.
in total, the entire project took 3 years. The timber went up in a week and a half. That's not to say that the facade and everything was also done in a week and a half. The facade then took quite a bit longer, because it was stick built, it wasn't prefabricated. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a pretty normal build then for a normal multi-story structure. You'd give it about a week per level.
Yeah.
And just in terms of, I think it's really important, and this is something for the timber industry to consider, is you mentioned, who would have thought that construction sites, that things get damaged. I could have told you that before the project started. Construction sites they don't stay the same throughout. You get a lot of movement. You got cranes getting erected, cranes getting pulled down, other deliveries coming on the site. Things will happen. And if you've got a construction process that requires everything to go perfectly, then it will struggle. I think it's great that we can get timber into construction. I do question some of the environmental claims of timber, but that's another story. But we do need to understand that this is not construction sites don't just exist so that we can put together Lego blocks. Okay, and it really needs a consideration if you're going to do large scale projects in any sort of material. And that goes to precast concrete too. I'd also throw in.
Yeah, no, I agree with the precast. I think my point to that was that, with a usually concrete builds, you're finishing it over with something, you're erecting plasterboard and things like that. I think with this, it was, we were getting, people drawing permanent marker, you go and draw a detail on the wall to explain to someone, and there was things drawn all over the concrete, the timber columns.
That happens.
It was just...
That happens though. It's going to happen on site, and it just needs to be considered. That's all.
Yeah.
I would be wondering whether you did a debriefing with the tradies and the companies, or the trades companies afterwards, to see what their experience was, and whether they would do it again, or whether they would actually want to do something different the next time around. Was there that sort of learning experience and insight as well?
Unfortunately, no. Nothing that wasn't just a sort of casual, how would you do it again? No. And I think that is a missed opportunity. These people are actually still our clients, so that's not to say we can't actually go and actually have that sit down. We're a year and a half on since this has opened up, and to be honest, all the sort of post occupancy issues are actually happening in the retail portion of the project. Nothing has come up with the commercial building, which is, not to say they might have some issues, but they certainly haven't communicated those to us. But I agree that, this was the first one we did. It was the first one they did. Let's just sit around a table and have a chat about it, because I guess it's also valuable for us if we're trying to encourage other clients to do this. We're entering design competitions. It's actually good to know what those shortfalls were for them, to see how we can address it in the future. What we could do better?
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I think that would be really, really insightful for others as well, probably. Other companies and other projects. Kirsten, you have your hand up.
Sorry, I had to unmute. I found this really interesting, and thank you so much for sharing. It sounds like, and I don't think that you could have known this that the
Frozen.
timber was going to be the final finish. Oh,
Sorry, you just dropped out a little bit. Then you're
One-
back. Sorry.
yeah. So if all the tradies knew that timber was going to be the final finish, you would think that logic would dictate that they would not then write all over it. But maybe it's as simple as having a sheet that every tradie has to sign before they start the project that acknowledges that all of this is final finishing,
Yeah.
and you needed floor covering.
Yeah,
on
floor
everything.
covering. Yeah, the stairs. Yeah, they just
Yeah.
requested that because the side office actually was housed in this building too. So it was a lot of foot traffic up and down that fire stair.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those really minor things you just don't think about. And like, yeah, I would never expect a tradie to know absolutely every aspect of the design and know that. So it's just a management thing.
Learning
Yeah,
point.
but actually,
Yeah.
to that point, I will say that, you know, our office is actually just up the road from this site, so I was on site multiple times a week, and you know, I'd just walk around these buildings by myself and have chats to everyone, and it was actually really lovely. People were so interested in it. You know, just the random guy, you know, plasterboarding something would ask me a question. You know, normally you'd walk around and they'd just ignore you, but it was actually quite nice. You got to speak to quite a lot of people because they had never worked in it before and they were genuinely interested in it. So yeah, I think that's actually, you know, the flip side of that. Yes, bad words get drawn on walls, whatever. That's part of construction. But yeah, it was quite nice to see the attitude of everyone was really positive. Yeah.
I did have a question. Do you know what sort of timber it was that you used?
Yeah, it was spruce. Yeah.
Spruce. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah. So both all the glulam, the CLT, and the Tilly board were all spruce.
Okay.
And all from VHAG and Austria. Yeah.
Okay. Just a couple of few more questions in here. I don't know whether that one was answered, but future proving for utility installation regarding penetrations.
Yeah, there were a number of penetrations that were empty, and that was a provision for fit out. So I can flick back to that floor plan, but basically there was breakup of, let me just flick to it. Okay, so this plan here, you can see there are sort of indicatively multiple tenants across the floor plate. As it's happened, most of the floor plates are taken up by one tenant, but the provision for those holes in the beams were made, and capped off servicing was added to the building for that future proofing. Because that's not to say that, you know, what is currently a large single floor tenant would leave and this would be broken up into smaller tenants again. So that was considered.
Okay. Can you design a hybrid version with 50% timber, 50% conventional material to help with both price and buy-in from the client? Was another question that we had here.
Look, I think I mentioned in hindsight, we probably wouldn't have done the core in timber, given that you couldn't see it anyway. And it, you know, it actually took up a significant amount of coordination time to try and get the junctions to work, and for everyone to sign off on it. So I get the beauty of having what I, you know, inverted commas, called a pure construction. Just wasn't possible at the time. But yes, there are things that I would say absolutely that would help speed up the process, make things less complicated. But I don't know how things like, you know, a lift installation in timber has developed since then, whether there are sort of more testing and licenses around it. That means you don't have to do all these sort of weird jiggery pokery things to get it to work. But yeah, that definitely hybrid is, you know, the riser walls are all Hebel and that this is definitely a hybrid. Yes.
Anne, you've got your hand up.
Did you ever assess the embodied carbon benefits of this versus traditional sticks and bricks?
No, and I don't know if the client did either. I suspect they probably did, but yes, I did. I knew that question was going to come up, and unfortunately, I don't have the answer for that. So yeah, the simple answer is no. I don't know what the difference was. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're typically somewhere between 40 and 70%, depending on whether you account for the sequestration. But I know you did have some steel and things in there. So,
yeah.
but it would have obviously made a positive impact in that regard. But
And certainly the steel, you know, we could have designed out if we had the time. This during this process, the client made a lot of changes, and you're just up against a construction program. So that's just the outcome of that, really. But yes, we could have designed it to be timber and gotten rid of that steel, ideally.
And having done one now, do you still think you would have that 25% price premium badge attached to this? What would you be advising clients to expect if they were comparing timber to traditional build?
Right now, I would not be able to give that answer. I think Tim's way more experienced in the numbers of it, because like at the time this was under so much global turmoil.
Yes, it was a very difficult time. I mean, everything was 20-25% more expensive.
So I don't know if that sort of came down in the years afterwards, and now it's spiking back up again given what's happening in the world again. Tim, I don't know if you had any.
No, the shipping direct from Europe doesn't actually go anywhere near the Middle East or Singapore if you do direct shipments, so that's very stable. So a commercial building, 6 stories in Sydney, you're probably looking at a 10 to 15% premium over concrete, depending on the detailing. I would say, Rebecca, that doing a CLT core would have also added to the complexity and the cost.
Yeah, right.
It's still relatively unique to try and do a CLT core in Australia.
Yeah. And I just noticed that Nikki's made a comment about the importation implications for embodied carbon. I remember from my days at Lendlease that it was still very small in comparison to the amount of embodied carbon avoided by not using a steel and concrete frame. So it's quite unexpected. You think that shipping it is going to blow your embodied carbon, but and it obviously adds to it, but it's still it's a lot less. Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Kirsten.
Yeah, so I just had a question about the operating emissions of the building over the lifetime of the timber compared to a concrete business as usual version. Do you have any insights on that or calculations?
No, I don't have calculations, and I think in terms of the operation of this building, it is the same as a normal, concrete office structure. It's air conditioned, and you some of you will be able to tell me be more expertise on this, but the in the idea of oh my god, what is it, the mass, thermal mass, that that sort of thing. I don't know how that performs in terms, like, in comparison to concrete. I assume it's not as great, but yeah, it operates conventionally. It does have solar panels and a green roof as well. Like that is something that was incorporated. How much that makes a difference, because we probably do the same thing on a concrete building as well, wouldn't we?
Okay.
So
you don't
yeah,
think
I don't know numbers.
I would have thought the timber would have a cooling effect within the building, especially in summer, that it would not be as challenging to cool. But I'm not an expert, so.
All right, conscious of the time, just want to point out 2 things I just read and learned in the chat is CLT lift course. It's still unique in Australia. And we can all see one of the those exposed laminated beams in a pool in the Forster Aquatic Centre. So if we do want to see it, we don't have to go to London all the way. There was one more question, I think, here. Where did I see that? I thought there was one more question. What was it? Oh, movement, expansion and contraction in our environment. Was that factored into? Yes.
So the timber was brought to Sydney quite a long time before it was installed, so it could acclimatise to Sydney's climate. That being said, obviously I mentioned a number of times that we had very, very, very wet 3 months, so that did affect it a little bit. But in terms of expansion and contraction, there's a very small tolerance that's given in the timber panels. And again, Tim, you might have a bit more. From my memory, it was really small, the tolerance between the floor panels and things. Where we did have, the sort of normal 25 mill expansion joints was in the brickwork. So we had the control joints and movement joints in the brickwork, given it also was on this bracket system. And they weren't corked. They were actually sort of tipped with metal framing and then corked afterwards. But yes, still looks like a conventional brick, despite it being brick slip. It does have that control joint there. But in terms of the timber, it was really little.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, we're at time. Thanks so much, Rebecca. That was fantastic. I learned so
Thank
much,
you.
and it's such a beautiful building. So,
Thanks so
thank you
much.
for coming here and presenting to us. And Tim, thanks for pointing out that Rebecca had done this great work. Thanks everyone for joining us. Join us again on the 2nd of July if you want to hear something about the GBCA Green Star Fit Outs tool. And any other questions, reach out to us in the meantime. Thank you.
Okay,
Have a good
thank
day.
you.
Bye.